As far as the question on abortion, that is a matter of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court made the ruling, and the Supreme Court is the law of our land. And as long as that is the law of our land, I abide by the law of the land.
Women's rights wasn't won by voting.
On this July 4th holiday, thousands of women here in New York City protesting the recent Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, the High Court ruling ending nearly 50 years of the federally protected constitutional right to have an abortion.
My independence was taken away.
It is our right to our body the same way you can take away a right, but you can't take away a human right. And that's what we're here fighting to get back.
So far, at least 11 states have banned abortion services.
Since the Supreme Court's decision in Roe v. Wade, abortion has remained one of the most defining and deeply divisive issues in American public life. It lies at the intersection of law, politics, morality, and medicine, drawing the nation into a persistent debate over a fundamental question: what should the law protect, and when does human life truly begin? According to the World Health Organization, every year in the world there are around 73 million induced abortions. This corresponds to approximately 200,000 abortions per day. In the USA, where nearly 30% of pregnancies are unintended and 40% of these are terminated by abortion, there are between 1,500 and 2,500 abortions per day. Nearly 20% of all pregnancies in the USA, excluding miscarriages, end in abortion. Guttmacher Institute reports 930,160 abortions performed in 2020 in the United States. That's with a rate of 14.4 per 1,000 women. CDC reports 629,898 abortions in 2019. That's with a rate of 11.4 abortions per 1,000 women. Roe v. Wade set the stage for the legality of abortion. In 1970, Jane Roe filed a lawsuit against Henry Wade, the district attorney of Dallas County, Texas, where she resided, challenging a Texas law making abortion illegal except by a doctor's order to save a woman's life. In her lawsuit, Roe alleged that the state laws were unconstitutionally vague and abridged her right of personal privacy, protected by the 1st, 4th, 5th, 9th, and 14th Amendments. This brought up the question of whether the Constitution recognizes a woman's decision to have an abortion. The decision was made that the first trimester abortions were not to be regulated, but the state's second trimester abortions can be regulated, but only for maternal health. And the third trimester abortions can be regulated or outright banned after viability, but they don't have to be. For decades, this decision left citizens mostly ecstatic but some distraught. The possibility that states can allow abortions to as late as the third trimester led to the rise of pro-life movements, and eventually the overturning of Roe v. Wade on June 24, 2022. Those who oppose abortion often argue from a straightforward premise: human life begins at fertilization. If that's true, then the unborn child is already a member of the human family, different in development but not different in value. From that perspective, ending that life isn't a negotiable matter of preference or circumstance, but a direct violation of a fundamental right. Supporters of legal abortion, however, are often divided, not necessarily over whether the unborn is biologically alive, but over whether being alive is enough to carry the same moral status as a born human being. Some argue that what confers full moral value isn't simply human DNA, but qualities such as consciousness, self-awareness, or the ability to feel pain. From that viewpoint, a common middle position emerges. Abortion should remain legal in early pregnancy but restricted later, often around 16 to 20 to 24 weeks. That's when some argue that the fetus begins developing a neurological capacity necessary for human conscious experience. Before that point, they believe the decision should rest primarily with the mother based on her circumstances and her right to choose. If the unborn are not living human beings, then the argument for strict regulation collapses, because there would be no life to protect in the first place. But if the unborn are alive, then abortion becomes something far more serious, not merely a private medical decision, but a moral and legal question about whether society has an obligation to defend human life at its earliest stage. And that's really the foundation of the entire debate. What exactly are the unborn? Because the moment we define what is being ended, we're forced to confront the weight of the act itself. The more clearly we understand the organism in question, the harder it becomes to treat abortion as a casual or purely abstract issue. In this video, I want to go into why this topic is a huge discourse amongst the dynamic between men and women, and the many arguments on each side. Taking a look at history and the conception of the procedure of abortion should give us a better picture of understanding the moral disconnect between the pro-life and pro-choice positions. The term abortion, or precisely spontaneous abortion, is sometimes used to refer to a naturally occurring condition that ends a pregnancy. That is, to what is popularly called a miscarriage. But in what follows, the term abortion will always refer to an induced abortion, i.e. ending a pregnancy via removing the fetus. Contrary to popular belief, abortion has been around for thousands of years, dating back to ancient Egypt in 1600 BC. Various methods have been used to perform or attempt abortion, including the administration of abortifacient herbs, the use of sharpened implements, the application of abdominal pressure, and other techniques. The more extreme or unorthodox ways abortion procedures were done were methods that exert direct pressure on the uterus, such as pessaries soaked in harsh substances, mechanical effects brought out by pressure on the body, such as carrying heavy loads or shaking the body, jumping and hopping. In the Code of Asura, dating to around 1075 BC, we see some of the earliest legal references to abortion in recorded history. Among the Assyrians, laws existed that punished women who deliberately caused a miscarriage, particularly when it was against the wishes of the husband. While these instances were shaped by a patriarchal social order, they definitely reveal an underlying assumption. The unborn held a recognized moral and legal significance within the Assyrian society. Other Assyrian laws reinforce this view. If a man struck a pregnant woman and caused harm, the penalty required the payment of double the standard weight in lead. Such laws suggest that the unborn were not treated as morally invisible, but as entities worthy of protection, respect, and legal consideration long before modern debates ever emerged. There is also ancient Greece. In the case of ancient Athens, abortion was not forbidden by law. However, this right was not directed at the woman and her sovereignty over her body, but the rights of the father of the child she was carrying. The pregnant woman is not allowed to have an abortion without permission. The responsibility for terminating the pregnancy rested with the woman's husband, or, in the case of a slave, with her master. After all, the perception regarding the woman, which is emphasized by many sources, is that her body is the vessel for her child, while fatherhood plays a prominent role in relation to motherhood. However, the existence of the embryo as a living being begins to emerge at the end of the 5th century BC, although the fetus is not considered to have a right to life. It seems as though the fetus lives at the expense of whether the father approved of having them. Their right to life was being decided by another person. And finally, we have ancient Rome. Now, in ancient Rome, having children was seen as a societal and economic issue, since the responsibility of caring for children would keep the upper class from the duties in contributing to society as a whole. Similar to Greece, Rome accorded the fetus neither right to life nor soul, but saw the fetus as part of the woman's body. The embryo is, namely, before it is born, a part of the woman, specifically of the internal organ. And it is said that an embryo not yet born is not a real person. One can infer that abortion generally took place between the 3rd and 7th months. The contrasting perspectives of these ancient cultures mirror the divisions we see today. How society defines the unborn inevitably shapes how it understands abortion itself. In places like Athens and Rome, abortion functioned largely as a tool of family planning and population control, evaluated through social utility rather than moral absolutes. In contrast, Assyrian law, despite its limitations, reflected an early sign to treat the unborn as lives worthy of protection. These differences are pretty similar. They kind of reflect the modern divide between pro-choice and pro-life worldviews, one grounded in autonomy and societal management, the other rooted in the intrinsic value of human life.
So when does a child or fetus or clump of cells, whatever you want to call it, when does this clump of cells or fetus become living?
When it can sustain
But-
its own life.
But when is that? When is the sustainability?
Contraceptives were used throughout history, and there were so many options. You'd be surprised to know how badly they wanted to crack without responsibility, like something as simple as a plant or literal crocodile dookie to cover the cervix. But things changed when this woman right here changed the game. Margaret Sanger didn't invent the abortion pill, but she did popularize it to an extent that nobody has seen before. When people think of someone like Margaret Sanger, they think of her accomplishments as a woman who fought for women's rights and gave us the Planned Parenthood organization, which is now heavily funded by the US government. I think it's fascinating that some people throughout history are painted a certain way owing to either their flaws or their accomplishments, but rarely both. And it has to do with the time period of where and when these people lived. This may seem like a short off-topic rant, but it's relevant, I promise. She was an activist for women's rights and even protested in New York City for her beliefs, being a part of the Socialist Party. Sanger strongly believed that the ability to control family size was crucial to ending the cycle of women's poverty, but it was illegal to distribute birth control information. Working as a visiting nurse, she frequented the homes of poor immigrants, often with large families and wives whose health was impaired by too many pregnancies, miscarriages, or in desperation, botched abortions. Often too, immigrant wives would ask her to tell them the secret, presuming that educated white women like Sanger knew how to limit family size. Sanger made it her mission to 1. Provide women with birth control and information, and 2. Appeal the federal Comstock law, which prohibited the distribution of obscene materials through the mails and regarded birth control information as such. She then launched her very first feminist publication, The Woman Rebel, in 1914, about birth control. This was against the Comstock laws, and when she was charged, she fled to England. When she returned to stand trial, her daughter tragically passed away, which led to public pressure to get the charges dropped. In 1916, she opened the first birth control clinic in Brownsville, Brooklyn. Barely a week later, she was arrested and spent 30 days in jail. Sanger's arrest garnered much media attention and brought her several affluent supporters. She appealed her conviction, and although she lost, the courts ruled that physicians could prescribe contraceptives to women for medical reasons, a loophole that allowed Sanger to open a clinic in 1923, staffed by female doctors and social workers, which would later become the Planned Parenthood Federation of America. This advocacy for birth control and other contraceptives led to Sanger forming the National Committee on Federal Legislation for Birth Control to lobby Congress for legislations that would permit doctors to prescribe birth control. Her efforts led to the legalization of contraceptives and birth control for doctors to prescribe to their patients, which led to the end of the Comstock laws in 1971. This is precisely what they teach about Margaret Sanger and her efforts to help women in poverty and in need, to get them to stop reproducing for a better life. Her efforts landed her in jail multiple times, which gives the public the impression that she was fighting to not be silenced. But on the contrary, I view her efforts with birth control as not only to ironically control women's bodies, but also to enforce eugenics, which sought to eliminate the undesirable individuals. What do you mean by undesirable, you might ask? Well, basically, if you were poor, or if you had any birth defects that would restrict you from living a normal life, then you shouldn't be able to be alive or reproduce. This was supported by her article titled America Needs a Code for Babies, where she basically advocated for people to need permits to have children. Advocating for any form of eugenics is ethically dangerous for society because not only is the type of eugenics dependent on fallible humans to decide for themselves who is fit or unfit to reproduce, but it also relies on coercive control over the population, which ironically violates bodily autonomy. And then she had this thing called the Negro Project, which was a plan to push contraceptives towards the African American population. At a glance, it doesn't seem like a crazy bad thing since Sanger was pushing her ideas towards the white population as well, but still, it gets concerning when you see her going to like KKK rallies to support this idea and her reasons for eugenics over people who would be unfit, like being in poverty or underdeveloped so they couldn't procreate. This will track today to see that the majority of women who get abortions are women who are in poverty. Those women in poverty are majority Black women. With that in mind, the African American population has been stagnant for many years because of this issue. Just to clarify, I'm not trying to insinuate that her project towards the Black population was directly intended on racism. You can make the argument that it was systemically set up for Black people to fail, which I can agree on, but her agenda was more towards the poor, who were mainly African Americans. But let's put her ideology aside and say that she could have genuinely thought that abortion and birth control were a net positive for humanity to limit suffering. But I don't agree that you can support the idea of abortion or birth control without having some sort of eugenic ideology. You may believe you don't, but the implications will tell you otherwise. You may believe the right to choose could depend on the mother's financial situation. That would imply that abortion should at least be permitted when a woman is poor. But that reasoning is similar to saying someone should have the option to abort a child based on race because of the hardships that group might face. We wouldn't make that kind of decision for a child based on their race, and in the same way, we shouldn't make it solely on the basis of them being born into poverty. The efforts of Planned Parenthood throughout history have led to the debate about the unborn and whether they are alive or not, thus creating a new era for contraceptives, which is what we commonly know as an elective abortion today.
Well, I suppose a subject like that is really so personal that it's entirely up to the parents to decide. But from my view, I believe that there should be no more babies.
The majority of abortions occur during the first trimester between 1 and 12 weeks of pregnancy. First trimester abortions are often performed chemically using medications such as mifepristone, also known as RU486. Mifepristone works by blocking progesterone, a hormone necessary to maintain the uterine lining. When progesterone is blocked, the uterine lining breaks down, cutting off oxygen and nutrients to the fetus, which results in its death. Approximately 24 hours later, the woman is instructed to take misoprostol, either orally or vaginally. When used in combination with mifepristone, misoprostol induces strong uterine contractions and bleeding to expel the fetus from the womb. This process can be physically painful and often lasts several days. In rare cases where the chemical abortion is unsuccessful, a surgical procedure, typically suction dilation and curettage, is required, in which fetal tissue is removed from the uterus using suction. Second trimester abortions, occurring between 13 and 24 weeks, are generally performed using a different surgical method. One common procedure is dilation and evacuation, D&E, which involves the use of surgical instruments including forceps, such as the Sofer clamp, to dismember the fetus and remove it from the uterus piece by piece. Third trimester or late-term abortions take place after approximately 25 weeks of gestation, way past the point of viability. This is when a fetus may be capable of surviving outside the womb with medical support. In some cases, a substance such as digoxin is injected into the fetus to induce cardiac arrest. The fetus may remain in the uterus for 1 to several days while the cervix dilates. Afterward, labor is induced and the deceased fetus is delivered, or further surgical intervention may occur. This is the reality of abortion, and it's important to know what we're discussing in its most raw form. The reality is disheartening, and for a moment I want both sides to recognize your opposition stance on abortion and see how they would view it based on the actual procedure. I resonate with the pro-life position that human life deserves the same right to life as any other born human being. This is because I believe sentient human life is unique and fundamentally set apart from all other species, and therefore possesses inherent value. That value is so significant that humanity searches the cosmos for other beings like us. My view goes beyond conscious experience or utilitarian calculations. It's rooted in the belief that human worth is found in the very nature of what it means to be human. My rebuttal to the consciousness argument is that human consciousness is completely fluid and not fixed. Not only would it be hard to regulate such an arbitrary standard, but it also ignores the fact that the brain constantly improves and develops throughout pregnancy and even after birth. We don't have a fully developed brain until about 25 to 30 years of age. Fetal brain waves can be detected via EEG as early as 6 weeks and 2 days. At 8 weeks, we can see the central nervous system is active, where babies can be seen swallowing, sucking their thumbs, and even touching their faces. To cap it at 20 to 24 weeks would invalidate the evidence of the unborn having the brain capacity to do these things before the 16 to 20 week mark. This is where the pro-choice community would agree that this is when they deserve the human right to life. Also, this position is a slippery slope that can lead legislators to make infanticide legal with abortion. A couple of questions for the affirmative. If human consciousness is what makes a person, then what happens when they lose that consciousness conscious experience? Do they no longer become human? If a child is born without parts of the brain but still lives a remarkable life, does that make them less human? Or how about if someone is in a persistent vegetative state like locked-in syndrome? And also, what type of conscious experience? Is it all human conscious experiences? I know it would be hard to define what human consciousness is, but anyone is free to answer the consciousness questions for me. I'm genuinely curious. In reference to the argument that a fetus that doesn't have brain capacity is similar to a brain-dead patient, that would only apply if the fetus has no potential to gain that brain activity. The brain-dead person has parts of his body that are incapable of regaining natural function, while a fetus doesn't have that function yet. There are signs of the fetus that are growing that show the possibility of them gaining brain activity. But even if this is a valid argument, you'd have to show why consciousness is even worthy of protecting and why that shows value at all. The many reasons why people get abortions are for the issues that don't concern the unborn, but the social and economic disparities that force their hands into making this terrible decision. If we put our efforts and our funding towards fixing these issues, then the problem of abortion will go away for both sides. As of September 11, 2025, federal Medicaid funding for Planned Parenthood was effectively cut following the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed by Donald Trump. While legal challenges temporarily paused the action, courts ultimately allowed the funding to proceed, impacting over 1.1 million patients nationwide who rely on Medicaid for care, including cancer screenings and STI testing. I believe that this is a net positive for the unborn, who can get cancer screening and STI testing in other places, not just at Planned Parenthood. And if we segue the funding for the places that don't do abortion procedures, then the problems of not receiving these medical procedures goes away. Of course, it's all easier said than done, and there's a lot more work to be done, but the process is still possible. There should be funding and action towards issues that will lead people to conclude that getting an abortion is not the solution to these external issues. Abortion should be the problem we need to solve, whether it's better healthcare for women or subsidizing mothers in poverty. There are always ways to make the situation better, because abortion is murder, plain and simple. Thank you for watching, and as always, God bless.